happening. And so the farmer goes in that season and he's able to recognize those things that are sapping the life out of the tree. A dead branch is of no use. The suckers, we called them back in the day when I worked in the orchard, you'd go through and pull. The leaves looked different, and you knew what a sucker was, and oftentimes those leaves hung up longer. And so you'd go through and pull those out because they're taking the nutrients and the life out of the tree, and yet they're producing nothing. So back in John 15, the farmer prunes. He cuts off the dead wood, casts it on the burning pile, but he also prunes those that are producing so that they'll produce better fruit. And so in the season of our soul, one of those changes in the condition or is in our circumstances and our behaviors is God working in there to be able to prune and to work through those things in our life that we hold on to that really are maybe harming us or causing us not to produce what we really need to produce. So one of them is behaviors. Cutting out the dead wood, if you will, of sin in our life that recognize God knows that as long as that sin is in your life, we will never have the relationship that I have intended for you. You will never be the producer of the kind of fruit that I want you to have. So I got to cut it out. And so maybe we begin to recognize in the winter the consequences of our sin that happen in our life. We're, if you will, paying the price in our mind, we think, but really maybe God's saying, I'm just calling it the way it is. Let's bring it to the surface and deal with it. This unwillingness to forgive someone, this bitterness that you hold on to, this choices that you're making in life where you're putting something else first before me. I've let it go season after season, but this season we're dealing with it. And God exposes those behaviors. But conditions are also circumstances where it has nothing to do with behavior. Loss of a loved one, maybe a persecution at work, situations out of your control economically and other things that happen in our life where we recognize, why, God? I mean, I've lived the life the way that you've called me to live. I've made the right choices, and look at my life. And even God uses those circumstances, one, to produce feelings. So they kind of go back and forth, because even in circumstances, when you see the conditional changes of circumstances, feelings come out. And so it can kind of go either way. Sometimes it's the circumstances that are happening. You notice the change in that, where you've lost someone, where now you're turning and the feelings are being produced of what is God doing? Why is he shooting arrows at me? Why is he punishing me? And all those kind of things. It goes back and forth. God uses those circumstances, those conditions to really, again, bring out the emotional feelings that are related to our relationship with God. And he works through that. So what are the conditions that God is working at in your life? What are the behaviors, the circumstances that God are using in your life? Look at him honestly and say, God, what are you showing me in this? As everything's been pulled away, all the fruit, if you will, all the good stuff that's been happening, and I'm coming down to the bare essence of my life, and I'm seeing now the way I treat my family, the way I treat my coworkers. I'm seeing now that I put off doing the things that you've called me to do or you want me to do. I see now the circumstances that are just pressing down on the financial crisis and the situation. How do you respond to God in that? How do you see through that what God is doing in your own life? I mean, let's be honest. God wants us to take those areas and turn them over, to confess them. The Bible talks a lot about when we recognize those areas of life, just to confess them. Be honest with God. Again, the realness of just saying, God, I didn't have you first here. I give it over to you. And to begin to let him rearrange your life, if you will, which is what the pruning is, so that you begin to produce the way that he wants to. I often, and it's not always true, but it can be, that sometimes our resistance in allowing God to prune keeps us in winter longer than other times. And I usually think, okay, if I give it to God right away, he can get me out of winter faster. But it doesn't always work that way. But it can have an impact. And so we need to be aware of the conditions in our life. But the third area, and this comes down really to the core of what is going on in winter, is the change in our core. The change in our beliefs, the core beliefs in our own life. Because if you look at the seasons of crops, that's the real essence of what happens in wintertime. All the nutrients are pushed back into the root system so that the tree isn't trying to draw the nutrients any longer out of the roots, because the roots are using them to develop the roots, to build a stronger root system, so that when the next crop comes, the tree can grow stronger and be more productive because it's got a deeper root system. That's what's happening in the winter. Externally, you look at the surface and you think everything's dying, nothing's working. But under the ground, a lot is going on. And so it is in the winter in our soul when we realize that what in Lamentations talking about, or even in the story that was shared, or probably in your own life, you realize all of these external things are being cut away, and God is exposing these feelings and these behaviors in our life because he's bringing us down to this point of where we really are put to the test on what we believe. He's pulling out those false beliefs that maybe we have and recognizing that, hey, they're being burned away. And then we come back to the realization of truly, what is God telling us? What is at the core of what he's trying to say? Jesus addressed this back in Matthew 7 when he was teaching, when he talked about the wise and the foolish builder. And he said, you can build a house on sand or you can build it on rock. And he says, what you build it on, that foundation, makes all the difference of whether or not you withstand the storms of life. And this goes back to the very thing we talked about, that the foundational belief structure is based on our relationship of Jesus Christ, is based on the truth that God gives us in his word, that is the only truth that we hold on to. When we make decisions in life, the only question we need to go to belief is saying, what does God say on this? What does the Bible tell us? Because every other truth we want to believe and we want to claim or we think maybe would make it look good for us fades away. It will not last. Other than the truth that God gives us. And that's where the writer, in all of his lament of what was going on, he comes around, and in that moment, I don't know if you caught it, but in that moment in verse 21 through 23, he says this, "Yet this is what I call to mind, and therefore I have hope." In other words, after all the shooting arrow stuff and what God was doing like a lion, he says, "This I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." Our belief system is foundational to the roots of our faith. Whatever when we leave this room, we face, our belief system is what sustains us to be able to last, to be able to lift beyond those circumstances, to be like Paul when he talks about, I can be content in all things because God has tested his faith over and over again. Not because God needed to know where Paul stands, but because he wanted Paul to understand the depth of the faith that has been growing in him so that Paul could say, it doesn't matter what goes on in my life, I'm content. He's created within himself, God has created within Paul this foundational trust in God, no matter what it might appear to look like in life. And so that's how our beliefs need to be looked at as well. If you're in a winter right now, obviously there's something in your life that you're thinking, wow, I don't know about this. I'm scared about this. I need to do something to control this situation. Because if I play this to the worst case scenario, I don't like where it's going. So what can I do to change it? Is the thinking we have. The belief that God wants us to have is saying, you know what? God's in control. God offers me beliefs and promises that say all things work together for good that those who love God, who've called according to his purpose.